Tere Traub, welcome to the Cloud Consulting Journal. Um, it's funny to interview you because the first time I met you, you know where I'm going.
We've come full circle, Mr.
I
Gordon.
met you at a job interview, and I was the interviewer,
Yes,
and we were supposed to rate people 1 to 5, and I gave you a 3, which I told
yes.
you. And it wasn't because you were 3 material; it was because it was like needed more information because it was at the Higher Ed Summit in Washington D.C.
Yes.
Um,
Was it
there was a
5 years ago
massive
now?
I don't even remember, but there was a
Yeah,
massive snowstorm,
there was.
and it feels like a different world.
It was a different world. Yes. You were my
Yes.
first interviewer.
Yes. And I felt like I did a horrible job. So hopefully this time I'll improve. Right.
But I hope you don't think there was a wrong hire because I was hired. So just so in case anybody was wondering.
Well, yeah, it was the worst 3 I ever gave in my life. But um now it's the people who don't know you. You come from an international business background
I do.
and you speak Spanish fluently, at least by my perception. I'm not actually. Um, so where did you come from and how did this happen? What, just the early days? What?
Oh, I've had a checkered career.
Okay.
So yes, we won't go all the way back because that would take too long. But how I got to where I am now is that by circumstances, I ended up working at Kaplan University, which is
Yes.
an online university, running their admissions for them for both business to business and international. And as part of that, went to Salesforce. And
Okay.
that was before there was an education cloud, I don't even know if there was a .org. So we implemented Salesforce, and that was not my first introduction because earlier in my career I'd used Salesforce just as a sales tool,
Okay.
but really using Salesforce as a enablement tool for businesses beyond sales and in higher ed, particularly because we converted the admissions and recruitment. We went off of an existing system to Salesforce. So it was part of the subject matter experts by group to convert international and business to start operating under that. And then from there, I went to the University of Texas system,
Right.
which was decided to implement a marketplace across their 14 institutions on Salesforce. That never went fully live, but again, had another introduction into Salesforce as a subject matter expert, introducing it, and made the decision to go to the dark side or technology,
Right.
and then interviewed with you and some other folks and joined Aperio as a consultant.
Very good. So going back to University of Texas, uh, what was the vision they had for Salesforce?
The vision they had was actually both Kaplan and I think Texas were ahead of their time. So, or that says something about me that I pick things that are ahead of their time. They originally they wanted to create a marketplace across the 14 different institutions, but also across the whole system. But it wasn't going to be ultimately it wasn't going to be just limited to that. They wanted to make a marketplace that you could actually, similar to Amazon, to be able to come in and take courses around an education standpoint. So and originally it was supposed to be set up so that the different schools within the Texas system could interchange because there's the University of Texas, everybody thinks of Austin, but there's a lot of different other institutions there. You've got Rio Grande, you've got El Paso. Obviously, not all those schools can offer the same courses and programs that UT Austin could do. So it was an intent to create a more equitable or more accessible marketplace so that the students could take more courses and they could interchange. And so it was twofold. It was to set up the marketplace, but also to create more online learnings for the different organizations. So that was the intent. We had blockchain behind that so that you could also take that and go to other institutions and prove that you've had it. So it was going to be initially within the system, but it was from the beginning, it was intended to be more broad.
Right. So I guess what confused me is the term marketplace. You weren't selling hook 'em horns T-shirts.
No, we were not. We were not.
It was a marketplace of classes.
Of classes, yes.
Okay.
Initially for the ecosystem of UT system, but with always intended to be broader after that.
Right. And you weren't a consultant, you were a real person.
I was a real person, but serving as a consultant within the UT system. There was a division within UT system to the different organizations. So it was quasi,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. It was quasi consulting. You were a consultant
Quasi-consultant.
within
An internal consultant.
internal consultant, right?
How's that?
And can you tell us what killed that project? It sounds pretty interesting. Was it bureaucracy?
I will say bureaucracy and politics, and we'll leave it at that.
Bureaucracy and politics kills a lot of things, especially in higher ed. I was your colleague at Aperio. We did some, if I say so myself, amazing work in higher education.
We did.
And then you went to 7Summits, who I saw your title in on LinkedIn. I actually applied for that same job. It was before COVID, and then COVID kind of killed it. What brought you to 7Summits? I know they were specializing in communities, and whenever we had a competition with Aperio, it was always, if it was a community cloud, it was always 7Summits, and they did some amazing work in community cloud. What brought you to 7Summits?
They do some amazing work around communities, and I've learned quite a bit in the 6 months here. So I was excited to join 7Summits twofold. One, just because it was a learning opportunity, but also when I joined them, they had already been purchased by IBM. So I was excited about the possibilities of what working for an institution like IBM, who wants to focus on not just higher ed, but education. Right. And what that would do to be in the forefront, not around what education could do and the possibilities that you could do around education. So it was a combination of those that brought me over to 7Summits IBM.
Okay. And so in my career, I've been part of two acquisitions. One was I was at PeopleSoft, and they got bought by Oracle, and one was, of course, Aperio, got bought by Wipro. Each of those kind of melded into the bigger organization in a different way. With Oracle, it was, welcome to Oracle, get to work, right? It was basically, we didn't even get a t-shirt, so I have no swag. So it was basically, here's the employee handbook, get at it. With Wipro, of course, it took multi years, right? Where on day one, our lives didn't change much, and then over time, processes started to line up, and then eventually the brand disappeared. How do you see that happening at 7Summits IBM?
So I was part of the Wipro Aperio acquisition. But by the time when I joined, they had just been acquired. So right. I was part of that transition. I'm finding that IBM I think they've learned a lot in their experiences. So it's only been a year, but they're doing a lot to incorporate us and include us. So we are still stand alone at the moment. The transfer of business is coming soon, but they're doing a lot to bring us together. And so they do look at the 7Summits as subject matter experts in certain areas. So we operate independently, but at the same time, I'm doing a lot of work with IBM. So I'm getting to learn the culture, getting to learn the processes just by the nature of the projects that I'm working on, which is exciting.
Very good. Have they shown you the computer that won Jeopardy yet?
I have not asked for that yet, but I do. Okay. I keep asking about Watson, and my first question was like, "Can I still have a Mac?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, you can have a Mac." I was really afraid I'd have to. Yeah, it was an honest question, and they're like, "No, you can have a Mac."
Wow, that's interesting. Because they make computers, right?
Well, they just separate. They just did. I don't think they make computers. I think it's part of the perception is that they still do it. Maybe it's a reflection of my age. But I don't know. They did just separate into two companies. So they have the mainframe, and then they have the services that are separate out now.
Right.
Separated out.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So, are you still dealing mostly with higher ed?
Yes,
okay.
I am.
So, I've learned over the years a ton from you about higher ed, and we haven't really talked about this in a while, but What is going on with higher education today? And I know it's a broad question, and you hear a lot about it in the news, but what's your perception?
To me, it's an exciting time. I mean, I've always been impassioned by higher ed just because of the impact that it can have on people's lives, and also at the state of the business, because there is room for improvement. So, what is to me is what's always been exciting has become more exciting because with the pandemic, a lot of the barriers to entries and the naysayers in higher ed that said you can't go online, you can't do this, you can't do that. Well, they were forced to do that in record time.
And that was
So
because of COVID,
it
right?
was because of COVID. So the pandemic is A, accelerating and B, exposing a lot of things.
Right.
So I think it's forcing a lot of institutions to rethink their business and rethink their business model. And I've come from, my background is not from what one would call the traditional, or the 18 to 22-year-old 4-year campus. That represents a small portion of the educational possibilities, both here and international. So what gets me excited is the schools that are trying to change things, and make an impact on the economy and changing the business model. Because if you think about it, education is the same as it was back in, not quite the Magna Carta, but probably pretty close, and so being able to, some of those that are innovative, and it's not just what we consider as traditional universities, but also the ed tech companies, the community colleges, the Googles, the Microsofts, the IBMs that are offering courses. So I think the whole way we deliver education, the way we think about education, the way we really need to, fuel our economy, it's always been intriguing. And now with the pandemic, things have changed so much, and technology doesn't change that, but it enables it. So it's helping people to think differently. And then how can technology actually help you change? So to me, there's so many things going on. It's not just about going online and doing delivery. It's how do you communicate with students? We learned that, health is really important. And it's not just, making sure they show up for class, but do they have enough food? Do they have Wi-Fi? So there's so many things now that we're able to work with our students to provide to make sure that they're successful. And it's not the 18 to 22-year-old. If you look at students now, they're older, they're adults. A lot of them are part-time. They're, parents, and they're going to school at the same time as their kids. So lots of changes are happening in the landscape.
Right. I mean, for the record, I went to school and I didn't have food or Wi-Fi. I didn't have food because I spent my money on other things, and I didn't have
Well,
Wi-Fi
I
because
converted
the
my meal
internet didn't
plan.
exist.
Yeah, I converted my meal plan to cash at the beginning of the semester. So
There you go. Oh, you brought up an interesting thing, is like all these schools have been rushing to get online. How does a institution distinguish itself or make itself special if all higher ed is going online? So is Harvard competing with University of Phoenix and everything in between?
I, well, it's about brand still. I
Okay.
mean, brand and what you deliver, but it's also about understanding who your population is and what you deliver. So I would say that Harvard maybe is not competing against University of Phoenix, but they may be competing against Google. They may be competing against Apple. So they have different competition than they had before. So
Right.
it may not be the traditional university and being online, but it's really, you need to understand who your students are, how they expect to receive your product, which is your education, and how are you going to be able to deliver that, and what's the experience that you're doing, because students are now much more of a consumer grade, so their expectation, before I think it was kind of like, this is what you get, this is what you get. Now the expectation, you're a consumer, you're a buyer, you're buying something, you have expectations of what you're going to deliver, how it's going to deliver, you're going to get a return, and you're going to be satisfied. So I think it's more of a mindset that, hey, we have to serve our student population regardless of what that student population is. And we've got competition that we never thought we were going to have before.
Right.
So
That's interesting. I forgot what I was going to ask. I was going to ask about community colleges. And when you and I were working together, we saw a lot of innovation they seem to be more innovative than the traditional 4 years in some ways, in a lot of ways. Why? What is going on with community colleges, and what makes them intriguing right now?
Well, I think they've always been, to me, they're always a lot. They're very close with the local workforce, so they have to be very in tune because they're actually serving their immediate economy or their local economy. Local being, local is not, 10. So there's usually a lot of connectivity with the state, with the employers, and another big change in education has been the tie-in with companies and institutions that are saying, hey, this is what our expectations are, this is what we need. So they've always been at the forefront because they've always had to listen to that. And they've also never, a lot of them don't, the majority of them don't, they're reliant on their the government or their state to give them money and tuition. So they don't have large endowments. So they have to make sure that they have to be scrappy, for lack of better terms. And so they've had to be able to adapt, and they don't have a high price point. They have the students that they serve are much more of a microcosm of what the economy is or what the U.S. population is today. So I think they've been forced to be more innovative, or at least be thinking more futuristic and not saying, oh, well, it doesn't really matter, we have enough money and we could just, do an alumni, or we have a football team. They don't have that. So they've had to think differently. They've had to think more, I hate the word agile, but they've had to actually just they had to think through, hey, how are we going to they had to be more practical is what it is in
Right.
actuality.
Right. Although some have football teams, but
Yes, some have football teams. Yes.
and I still have a couple years of eligibility, so
you go. Well, I thought
possibly.
you were going to go do the one in not Itessa.
Tech to Monterey, right?
Tech to Monterey. You're going to do a walk on.
Yes. I mean, I guess the other part in the Salesforce world that we talk to a lot are for-profits, and I know for-profits seem to come in and out of style, and they seem to get a lot of scrutiny from government and so on and so forth. But what do you see happening in the for-profit space?
Well, I come from the for-profit, and I know what everybody hears about for-profit, regardless of what you think about it. I had a very positive, and I can say that it changed the lives of many people. But I think one thing that was very differentiating for the for-profit is that they treat education like a business, with accountability, with metrics, with ROI. And I think that was a big game changer for the higher ed. I think for-profits, they have to prove their viability. They have to prove, they have to make sure that they're delivering a product that people are getting worthwhile. And students is all about, hey, they come, how long is it going to take? How much is it going to cost? And what's going to do for me? Right. So education is used to do something different, be it a career change, to do an advancement. So they have to have a proof source at the end.
Yeah. And you kind of indicated that you got into higher ed before Salesforce really did. And I think while we were at Aperio, we saw Salesforce, become a real power player in higher ed, and creating their own higher ed data architecture, start creating their own apps on there. Where is Salesforce now with higher ed, and where are they going?
They just keep growing and growing. I mean, the power of Salesforce is, I think it's twofold. Well, it serves as a system of engagement. And I think what the power is it's able to bring all the very disparate parts together. And underlying that is just like anything, it's data. The data is the currency. So they're enabling the data to become apparent and be surfaced, so you can get insights, which is really important. That way you can react across the board from an operational standpoint, from a student support, from a recruitment, from a research, from an outreach. But it's making processes more simple. I mean, as opposed to, as we used to say, how are you running everything? It's in your Excel. So a lot of, a lot of higher ed is still using Excel to manage the things, and you just can't operate like that.
Right.
Expectations. I mean, people, what you have on your iPhone, your expectations of responses, that's an expectation again of the consumer grade. And so it's not only, again, that you have to deliver the consumer experience to the student, but it's also you have to be more efficient in how you run your operations, because part A could be COVID. Who knows if we're going to have another pandemic, or B, it's just an efficiency of being able to run your operations and, justify the expense that you have.
Right. One thing that Salesforce always pushes is I don't know if push is the right word, markets to, is the connected campus,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I really bought into that, right? And it's a great vision, right? So the student data that comes in when they're an applicant, and while they're a student, and while they're an alum, is all in one database connected. As I got into higher ed, I found out that that's a lot harder than what it seems to be, right? It's just, and it's almost by design, right? That part of it is that higher education isn't really an industry; it's all industries, right? It's real estate, it's healthcare, it's education, it's athletics, especially if you go to Georgia or Alabama, or you went to an SEC school too. So it's basically a pro football team.
Not my team, but others in the SEC are.
So I guess when you talk to someone, if you were talking to a CIO at a big university, where would you tell her to start?
I think you have to see where the pain point is, though. I mean, what's most important? I think it's a combination of it. It's not so. Some people would say, "Hey, you got to stop at the front where you do enrollment and stuff like that." But you have to really. It's a combination of where are your issues? Are you having a retention issue, or are you having an attraction issue?
Right.
I used to say a lot of some schools have a selection issue. Some people have like a recruitment issue. Are your students maintaining? Or do you have a faculty issue? Do you have an issue? At the beginning of the pandemic, I talked to a lot of CIOs to find out, what do they wish they had done 6 months before had they known this pandemic? Right. Some of it was their LMS system, because it was archaic and they couldn't move that rapidly. Some of it was the fact that they didn't have a communication system. So I think you really have to look at it to see where you are as an organization. And if you're going to say where you're going to start is know where your data is and who owns it, is what I would say. That's where you start.
Right. And buy a nice bottle of whiskey.
Yes.
For a CIO, because they've got a tough job.
Yes.
It's harder to be the CIO than the football coach, I imagine.
Certain days.
Yeah. So what keeps you in consulting?
The different, it sounds cliche, is that it's nothing's the same.
Yeah.
It's not, it's a couple, it's the projects that are different. And that's why I get excited about higher ed, because it is at a point where there's still a lot of things going on. And the fact that you can bring business aspects to higher ed, and, and you get what some large multi-corporations doing is not just that different in terms of how you approach it with a company with a lot of different divisions and things. And the fact that I get to get involved in things that are actually changing a company, but also having an impact on students. So, and I get excited about, look at the projects that we worked on. I don't think there was one that was the same. And each one had something slightly different that was exciting. And it was like, you're trying to solve a problem, and you don't know what the answer to the problem is, but you know what the problem is. And so it's like trying to put a puzzle together. And it's also meeting people. I think that we used to sit around, and we've met some incredible people, and you have these conversations that are just, sometimes you feel like, well, I'm not the smartest one in the room, and I just need to, and I'm going to learn from all these people. And then all the other times you can say, hey, let's figure out how to solve this. And you get a collaboration and a teamwork together that gets me excited. It's really about the people too. Yeah.
I've never been the smartest in the room, so that's.
Neither am I.
Cheers.
Cheers.
So you are an international woman of mystery. Somehow you live in Austin and Miami.
Yes.
These are the two kind of hottest places, not literally, well, sometimes literally, but in the tech space, especially, right? Um, how do you compare Miami and Austin?
Um, Miami is up and coming in terms of tech space. We'll talk about tech. Is Miami's up and coming. It always had a small tech scene, but with the COVID, with the pandemic and people moving down there, I think it grew a lot. So, and Miami realized that before the pandemic, but they realized that they need to diversify their economy and not just rely on tourism. So and something in common with both states is there's no income tax. So it's, it's, ooh. So there's an attraction there for people that are
Right.
living in some of the high tax states. And if you think about it, I think Texas or Austin is attracting California people, and Miami is attracting New York people. So you've got a migration of people that have taken what was there and then multiply it. Austin was always a tech scene. It was there before I came here, but I think this has just been multiplied by it. And Miami
Yeah.
it's new. They're trying to figure out what they want to be in terms of tech. I mean, if you look at Austin, just announced that Google just, even though nobody's going back to the office, they just rented out the whole building that hasn't even been built yet.
Wow.
I mean, Apple's coming here. They're building a campus. You've got Tesla coming here. So you've got a lot of activity going on here. I think in Miami, it's smaller, but it's growing.
Okay.
And sorry, go ahead.
Well, does IBM have an office? Do you go to an
IBM has
office
a
or do you
huge
work from home?
office here. No, a huge office. I joined
Okay.
during the pandemic, so I haven't been to the office,
Okay.
but they have a huge office. And I believe in Miami, they have a large one outside of like Miami proper. So IBM
Okay.
has a huge office here. I just haven't had the opportunity to go there just because of COVID protocol. And I'm
Okay.
remote regardless.
Yeah.
So
You're remote regardless.
Mhm.
Which city has better food and restaurants?
Ooh, that's tough. That's tough. When I moved to Miami, all they had was that's not all they had. They mostly had Cuban. And when I moved to Austin, it was largely barbecue. But in the times that I have lived here, both places have expanded immensely. And I will say that Texas is probably have a more Austin is more of accessible because you've got food trucks, and Miami is a little bit more high end, but still you can find some things in Calle Ocho and some of those local places that are really good too. So
Yes. Very good. And I know you're an international traveler. I've traveled internationally with you. Where are some of your favorite places to go?
well, Spain, Madrid,
Spain.
that's one of my favorite
Madrid.
places. It's all different. Mexico City is one of my favorite cities in the world.
Right.
Internationally, or yeah, it's tough. Yeah, it's all about food,
It's all about the
wine,
food.
and and like during the pandemic, I went to Alaska for the first time,
Okay.
because I always wanted to go. That was fabulous, but there wasn't 10,000 people on a cruise ship with me, so
Okay.
it was incredible to be able to be with nature with is one of the locals. So that was fun. So that was equally as enjoyable.
Yes. And as far as I mean, getting back to travel, it used to be a part of the consulting experience. Are you
Yes.
traveling for work anymore?
I have traveled once for work in the last 18 months. Yes. Mhm.
Same with me. I'm losing
Yeah.
all my status on my airlines.
Yeah. No, I have traveled once for work because we're dependent on the client. If the client
Right.
wants us to come, we will go there. I mean, obviously it's a personal decision, but yeah, I don't know that people are wanting to come back. So yeah, I have had one business trip in 18 months versus as before, as you and I said, we were,
Right.
if not on a plane every week, every other week we were on a plane.
Right. And I know, I mean, as a Midwesterner, 7Summits was located in Milwaukee, and I was always a big fan of Milwaukee. Is that still a place for them, or is it been more
There's,
incorporated?
I think it will be incorporated. It still is. There's a large percentage of people that live there. I have not been there because we have not done on site since we've joined. So They talk
Yeah.
about The Office. I haven't seen The Office because I joined during the pandemic, but I do know that there's a culture up there. There's a lot of people. A lot of people like the Packers and
Right.
with the basketball team that I can't remember.
The Bucks.
The Bucks.
Um, yeah, but yeah, they're not very memorable. But yeah, during the pandemic, I left a job, got a job, left a job, and got a job, and really never changed location.
Yeah.
I'm still just talking into a computer. It's a bizarre time that we live in. And rounding back to student experience, I mean, I guess finding the differentiator so that the college experience isn't like that, right? So that I don't know, maybe that will be the experience for students. They'll go through many colleges throughout their career.
Yeah, I do. I would say the majority of the U.S. population does go to more than one school. Majority of them don't finish their education. If you look at, I don't know the percentage in front of me, but the studies that they do, the large percentage of U.S. adults don't finish their education.
Right.
So, yeah.
I mean, I guess one final question is, what 2022 is just starting. We've had a rough couple years. I mean, I guess as a culture, as an organization, as a world. What are you looking forward to in 2022?
Seeing people. I really want to go see my friends.
Would you say you're an extrovert and you miss people?
I do. I don't know that. Yeah, I am an extrovert, but I mean, I like my Terry time. But I think we all do as consultants need some downtime or like in the corner time because we're on so much. Sometimes it's tough to be. I do miss the energy of seeing people, like when we used to, like even whatever conferences we were. That we were always remote, but we got to see each other and in person. So I do miss that energy and that connectivity that we had. So I would like to be able to I don't need to be on a plane every week anymore, but I wouldn't mind, connecting, not over Zoom.
Yeah. I mean, consulting is a tougher game remote, especially the kind that we did that was a lot of workshops and that kind of thing. You miss a lot, I think, in body language and talks in the hallway of people that they weren't comfortable saying something in a meeting. And
well, I do think that the model that we had, that where you go at the beginning, the middle, and the end, is appropriate. I don't know that you have to be there all the time. I think those days are gone. I mean, we had a couple of clients that insisted that we be there all the time, but we're like, yeah, really don't need us that often. But the first time getting the chance to meet people, you create a connectivity that makes these conversations easier. It's a little socially like awkward to meet people and hi, how are you? It's harder to get to build that rapport.
Right.
Just on the. So, what are you?
Well, anyway, what's that?
What are you looking forward to?
Oh, 2022. What am I looking forward to? I think you stole it, right? It's just, I think when this pandemic started, it was a bummer, of course, for a lot of reasons, but the seeing people, and I thought, maybe it'll be nice not to travel, right? I have a child at home, I have a dog, I have a wife, I have stuff I want to do around the place, and it'd be nice to do that. About a year into it, I'm like, this is a little ridiculous, right? This is a little, you need that space away for one thing, and the other thing is exactly what you said, like interacting with I miss my colleagues, my teammates, right? And my current employer doesn't have an office in Chicago. We got together as a Chicago area one time, and that was nice. But it's just I'm looking forward to spending more time in person. I think we all are, especially you, Terry. I want to come down to Austin.
Come on down.
And like everybody else in the world, you and me and Elon Musk can have dinner sometime.
Sure, I'll just call him.
All right, Terry. Thank you very much.
Dial.
Yes. Take care. Thank you.
Good to talk to you. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.